Alrighty. Thanks again for coming. It should be an interesting week. Okay, so this little mini presentation is on Kusama. Hands up if you know what Kusama is. This presentation is mostly pointless then. But I'll see if maybe I can go into a little bit more detail than maybe you've already heard. So yeah, Kusama is what we've termed a canary network. It's a test net that has real value on it, or it's a early unaudited dry run of the main net. So part of what Kusama is meant to do is reduce my stress levels when Polkadot is launched by giving me confidence that it won't instantly fuck up. So basically, we want to put, we want to incentivize there to be some degree of value on Kusama, but not nearly as much, we would hope, as the main Polkadot network, enough to make people act like they would with the main network, but without quite so much at stake, so that if things do break, then not so much is lost. So it's the main point of Kusama is, of course, that it's a sort of mirror copy of Polkadot. It's got the same fundamental capital base. Everyone who has a share of Polkadot will have a same exact share of Kusama, up until the point of Kusama's launch, at least. So after Kusama's launch, of course, there's some number of DOT tokens that are still yet to be assigned. They'll go to the Web3 Foundation for Kusama. So there will be some sort of disjointness, but up until the point of Kusama's launch, they'll be the same. It's not going to evolve into the mainnet. So if there's any, I don't think anyone's confused about this anymore, but in case anyone is, this is not like the beta phase of the mainnet or anything like that. This is like a separate network that doesn't contain any kill switch, that we're not planning on killing. Of course, its governance could decide to sort of terminate itself, kind of suicide the network or something. But that's not really that's not really planned, at least. We do, on the other hand, plan to bridge the two networks. It has its own SS58 version code. It's actually the version index is 2, whereas the main net is planned to be 0. So you'll get different addresses with the same public key for Kusama or not. It's supported in subkey. I guess probably. Has anyone here claimed Kusama tokens at all? Has anyone claimed any KSMs, Kusams? Yeah, a few people. Yeah, so you're probably familiar or at least aware of subkey and its ability to manipulate those Kusama keys. We've incentivized. We want to incentivize people to use and value Kusama to some degree. So in that sense, we've reserved 1% of Genesis DOT tokens, real DOT tokens, in order to sort of distribute in some sense to the users of Kusama or stakeholders of Kusama, or people affiliated in some sense with Kusama. We haven't decided exactly how it's going to work yet, but those 100,000 dots will are sort of earmarked for eventual distribution into or onto Kusama. So you can do, we plan. Kusama is like kind of the same as Polkadot, at least at this point. The two will probably evolve a little differently, partly because they're just launched at different times. So Kusama will be launched very soon, maybe in hours. I would definitely hope in days. And at that point, its tech, although it's heavily upgradable, it may be that some of the elements of the consensus algorithm, which is less easy to upgrade, changes before Polkadot's launch, and then the two would be sort of in principle slightly different. But certainly in terms of the runtime, certainly in terms of the higher level functionality, governance, parachains, and so on, they should be fairly in sync. Although Kusama would probably get those upgrades sooner. In principle, with Kusama, you will be able to do things like the proof of stake, so you can practice if you're planning on becoming a validator, then you can practice being a validator on Kusama with some actual real rewards. You can play around with the governance. We can see how the governance works. I hope people do play around with the governance. It would be nice to see what happens with it. It's fairly sort of new. It will be possible to deploy parachains. How many? I don't know. And it will be eventually, probably in the not too distant future, be able to deploy parathreads as well. And you probably don't know what parathreads are, but I will, if you come back later on today, then I will tell you what they are. Yeah, so a few of you have already claimed your Kusamas. If you do sort of have claims for DOT tokens, then you will have equal claims for Kusama tokens. You don't need to bother claiming them. I mean, you can just leave it. But if you want to, then you can. If you go to the claim.kusama.network, you will find appropriate information on how to claim it. So yeah, there's still a while to go of the final kind of bits of development, security auditing, bug fixing, polish, blah, 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 of Polkadot. So Kusama is very much early stage. Beware. It will probably break. It will almost certainly break in various ways, but hopefully the fixes won't be too difficult for us to make. So it will be a bit chaotic, at least initially. I'm going to talk a little bit more about, there's some links, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we're going to roll out with Kusama. Initially, Kusama is going to be a proof of authority network. So there's going to be a few authorities that will be run by the Web3 Foundation. There's not going to be any kind of reward for the foundation for doing this. It's just going to be a run-in period to provide basic state transition functionality for validators to come in and nominators to come in, sort of stake tokens for people to be able to claim tokens. And for very kind of mundane maintenance tasks like session keys to be set up for potential validators. So basically, it's a period of probably a week, maybe a few weeks for all of this initial run-in to happen. And then once we're sort of happy that people are sort of in and on and ready to go, then we'll flick a switch. The switch that we flick will be a transaction in the shape of a runtime upgrade that will alter the chain from a POA, from a proof of authority network with fixed authorities, to a POS network, which is to say a network with whose sort of staked validators will be the ones that get chosen to run it. At that point, Web3 will not have, so initially Web3 Foundation will have a special key, a sudo key. You probably, if you've done any substrate development, you'll be very well aware of what the sudo module is, sort of like a module that allows a particular user account to execute privileged functionality, privileged logic. Web3 Foundation, with this upgrade, will give up its sudo key. It's the entire module will be removed from the runtime, and therefore it will rely purely on the governance mechanism for doing any further alterations or important changes. This is important. It's actually very important legally speaking that Web3 Foundation doesn't retain fundamental control over the networks. It's the network at this point will be able to make balance transfers. People will be able to transfer tokens between each other, and it would be indeed quite problematic if Web3 were able to stop that from happening. Now, then the question becomes, well, hold on, what's the governance then of Kusama? And this is where it kind of gets more interesting. So Kusama will begin with what I'm terming as a tricameral governance structure. It's sort of tricameral. I'm gonna define it as being tricameral. One of the chambers, the sort of main legislative chamber, which is roughly equivalent to a parliament. So it's at least in the sort of UK British style sort of means of governance. Basically, it's the bit through which all legislation, all alterations to Kusama's runtime must go. So if we ever want to upgrade Kusama, then this is the body that must approve of that upgrade. And it takes the form of a kind of something like a referendum. It's stake weighted. It's actually lock time weighted as well, based on a logarithm of the lock time. So as you double the period with which you lock your tokens, then you gain an extra sort of vote. That I'm going to define as like the main chamber. There are two additional chambers which are there primarily to aid the practical functionality of the main chamber. They don't really contain any hard power. I mean, kind of sort of semi-hard power, I suppose, but like they're much more sort of lower level. The main chamber, this sort of referendum mechanism, is the thing that you actually have to get the backing of in order to alter anything on Kusama, really. The other two are the council and the technical committee. Now, the council used to be a rotating approval vote. If you've ever seen any of my other presentations about how the Polkadot governance works, then this is probably what I presented. It's probably not going to be this for Kusama. There are one or two. So broadly speaking, I'm still kind of quite fond of this idea of a rotating approval vote to choose one member at a time of the council. But unfortunately, it does have one or two drawbacks that are a bit kind of annoying. The main one is that if for some reason some syndicate could control 50% of the total lock-weighted token stake, then they would be able to pick every member of the council. That's just the way how approval votes work. Instead, we're probably going to take a leaf out of the book of the staking system and use a fragment-based system, which is basically, it's kind of similar. It works in the same way. You approve of a number of candidates, but the underlying logic kind of apportions each of your vote to just a single candidate, and it does so in order to maximize the votes between a number of eventually elected candidates. So it's sort of like it works a lot more as a proportionally representative system. Now the council's basic ability is, again, it functions a little bit similar to the British Parliament system, in that the council is able to control to some degree the legislative agenda. So they're able to put forward proposals for them to be voted on by the original, the larger referendum-based first chamber. Actually, they share the legislative agenda half and half. They take it in turns with the public queue. So also members of the public, any stakeholder is free to sort of make their own suggestions as well. And then every other time, you choose either the thing that the council wants, the proposal that the council is putting forward, or the proposal from the most backed proposal from the public queue. So that much hasn't really changed from before. Now, the additional thing is the technical committee. The technical committee is composed of the various teams, at the moment, just one, that have implemented Polkadot. And either Polkadot or the Polkadot runtime environment. So initially, it's going to be two votes for parity as the main people that have actually implemented it, and one vote for the Web3 research team, who are sort of also, the idea is that research teams that are contributing significant amounts to the Polkadot's ecosystem would also be eligible for a vote. As more teams come in, and actually implement the full Polkadot implementation, full Polkadot spec, then they will also be given a vote in this committee. Now, the committee doesn't actually have any real power. They can't propose anything. They don't control the legislative agenda. They don't have any say in whether something is approved or not. The only thing that the technical committee can do is that they can fast forward. They can fast track proposals. So a proposal, if the legislative committee forms a supermajority of approval, they can take what would be normally a council proposal that would normally, I don't know, like take a whole other month to come in, and then there will be a month's voting, and then there would be a month's delay before it was actually enacted. They can fast forward all of this, and they can get it all. I think they can reduce it to something like 3 days. And the idea for this is basically if there's a sort of emergency bug that needs to be fixed, then the council can come along and say, look, council, the technical committee can come along and say, look, council, you need to push this upgrade through, and we are going to back it, and we are going to make sure it goes in very soon indeed. So those are the 3 bodies at the moment. There are plans for bringing in more bodies, which I will talk about, I guess. How long do I have? Is this timer correct? Yeah? Okay. So the other 2 bodies that we're sort of looking at, one of them is what I'm terming spontaneous subject committees. So spontaneous subject committees, this is the idea where basically you take a random sampling of the voting population and you canvass them for their opinion, for their sentiment. And you actually pay them to actually return. So you're trying to get a high turnout for this. And the idea is that if they overwhelmingly come back with one opinion or another opinion, either yes, we approve of this, or no, we don't approve of this, then it should be a fairly, if it's statistically to the point of that you can be confident that it's representative of the wider voting population, then you can now take some action without having to go to a full referendum, or at least without having to go to a full referendum initially. So you can basically form a this kind of like sentiment committee early on, and not waste everyone's time on proposals that potentially aren't going to get a particularly significant majority of approval. The idea is that there's some way of turning it, sort of going, ratcheting up things. So if you do you pick an initial, let's say 100 representatives of the voting population, and they come back and they say, 60%, 65% are maybe in approval, 35% maybe not so much. It's difficult to say whether it's going to, which way the majority would go. So then you instead ditch those 100 and then double the sample size, you take 200 and you see how it goes then. And maybe if they come back saying 75% versus 25%, then you say, okay, there's a good chance that this will actually go through. You maybe double it again, and then assuming that that's still looking good, then you maybe put it forward toward a referendum. But if it doesn't go to that point, then you maybe ditch them and you reject it outright. Or if it comes back with 98% approval, then you say, right, well, actually, we're going to fast track this onto a referendum. So it's kind of an easier way of making sure that the appropriate action, the appropriate voting happens sooner rather than later. The other governance body that we're looking to experiment with is what I call there's a number of names that I'm sort of pondering, but it's a sort of grand jury or grand oracle committee. Now, the problem with so oracles are great in general. Oracles, they fulfill a really important task. They take in real world external data and they feed it into the blockchain, so the blockchain can do interesting, cool, useful, real world relevant stuff. So one simple example is price feeds. If you've got the let's say you want a stable coin, then you're going to want some sort of USD or other stable asset to crypto asset price feed coming in that will allow you to reward or punish people according to which side of the sort of bet they're on, and ensure that the price remains stable. So most of these stablecoin mechanisms, at least the decentralized ones, really do rely on an effective price feed. Now, you can say, right, well, validators are relatively well-trusted kind of people, so let's just have these guys come along and feed prices into the system. Every time you produce a block, you also have to like check the price and stick it in as an extra like bit of data, like an inherent, as we call them in Substrate, but basically an extra bit of data into the block. And that works fine. You can even like say, right, we'll just take the median in any given time window, and then we can manage even if a large minority of validators are dishonest and are feeding in dodgy prices. Unfortunately, though, if we get a majority of people feeding in the wrong prices, and there is literally no way of anyone else coming in and sort of saying, "Oi, those are wrong," then we've got a problem. Like no one else is punishing these validators. The validators are the ultimate authority in terms of the price feed, or that's the assumption, and therefore there's no incentive for these guys to really act honestly beyond a sort of general "we don't want Polkadot to fail" feeling, which ultimately succumbs to the tragedy of the commons, or at least that's what economists would have us believe. So we have potentially a problem. Now, the idea of the Grand Oracle Committee or Grand Jury or something is basically to be the oracle of last resort. So you let people, sort of these kind of potentially quite scrappy validators do their oracle work, but then you have a secondary, much slower but much more, in some sense, trusted or at least likely to be trustworthy committee that can be gone to in the case that there's a challenge for the validators providing, invalid data. So someone, if they provide invalid data, basically someone comes along and says, "Hey, this was invalid price feed. You're manipulating the price for your own benefit," and we can go to this sort of jury, and they can sort of say, "Yes, they did," or "No, they didn't." And if they did, then we can make sure that the price never makes it sort of very far, and that at least that the validators get punished and kicked off. Now, and the question is, oh, well, that's great, but what makes these guys any more trustworthy than the validators in the first place? And that's a much harder thing to answer. The Grand Oracle, this idea of there being a Grand Oracles, the first thing is that you can, as long as there's this additional body that's a fundamentally sort of different constitution to the first one, it's a check and a balance, right? So that's the first thing. It's like if you've got two different bodies that have to be paid off, then it's twice as hard, economically speaking, in order to get away with the attack. So that's the first sort of point. The second point is let's try and make sure that this membership is like fundamentally difficult to buy off. So the idea with the Grand Oracles is basically to find people whose professional reputation relies on them being honest, or at least not sort of dishonorable. And one of the ways of doing this is to sort of find professions that have really good internationally recognized ranking systems about, in terms of, how high up in their profession any given person is. Things like, for example, academia, where you have a rating of how many papers you've been cited in, how many major journals you've been cited in. Things perhaps like the legal industry, where as a lawyer, there's how many cases you've won, or how many important cases you've won, how many precedents you've set. And to compose a body politic of these of individuals with the highest ratings that come forward, and that are non-geographically and non-geopolitically aligned with each other. So you can't just buy off a single world region in order to have these guys all vote in one way. Make sure that there's a general disalignment and a general requirement of high degree of reputation, high degree of trustworthiness, and form a body from these guys. And these guys fundamentally are going to be kind of a different class of people to the validators, right? The validators are like, yeah, we run nodes, yeah, we've got people's stake behind us. So buying off both bodies would become appropriately difficult. And then the idea is that this can work not just for trivial things like price feeds, but also for much more complex things where there is a degree of knowledge required about natural languages. So you can start imagining things like constitutions, where you can set forth a bunch of very objective but still natural language-based statements, and require that these statements be evaluated whenever particular on-chain activity happens. As an example, you might have something like a runtime upgrade, and you might say, right, well, Kusama shall never pass a runtime upgrade which introduces arbitrary balance, or which reduces an account by an arbitrary amount of balance ever. Right? It's like, no, we consider this against the constitution of Kusama. And then it's like, even if somehow you manage to buy off a sufficiently large proportion of the stakeholding community that they actually pass this as a piece of legislation, I'm going to award myself a ton of Kusama tokens, you would still have to get it past the Oracle committee, the grand jury, who would then say, right, well, objectively speaking, this runtime upgrade actually disobeys one of the Constitution's rules, and therefore we will vote it down. And the idea is, of course, within Kusama, that the token holders still have the ultimate power. They could disband the grand jury or something before they tried to award themselves, but it's still an extra check and a balance. It's still an extra obstacle in the course of people who want to basically remove some of the expectations or go against some of the expectations of Kusama. Okay, so that's the ideas for, that's the launch of Kusama and some of the ideas surrounding what we will do with governance after the launch. I think I've still got, 5 minutes left, so if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. Yep.
With the constitution you were talking about, is there any way to write from that fit into the code? So, for example, we not even like an actual code check instead of going to a workflow check?
So the thing is, you want to suppose one of the things that I want to ensure can happen is, suppose there's a slashing incident, and it's down to I don't know, it's down to something that is eminently forgivable, right? Maybe there's a major data center outage in Shenzhen or something, right? And like a third of the guys go offline. It's not an attack on the network, there was no malicious party behind it, but nonetheless, these guys get slashed. So it's, it would be nice to be able to say, look, we acknowledge that this happened through no fault of your own. It wasn't a malicious activity. We're going to give you back 90% of your slash. We're going to still take 10% because, you shouldn't have put all your eggs in one data center, but in principle, we want to reward you some substantial amount. And that should go through governance. Now, if we then had some fundamental code-based law that's no account may ever be increased by more than X or Y or Z, then it's we can't really do that. It would trip up on that kind of thing. Basically, there are some rules that we would like to. I don't know. I think there are some rules that we would like to kind of bake in, or some expectations that we would like to bake into the system, but that are very difficult, if not impossible, to express in terms of code, just because they often deal with the unknown unknowns, right? The things that you can't express directly in code, you can only express in a very general sense. And it's like we could try and design all of these things and say, right, well, there should be a way of reverting a stake or reverting a slash or reverting part of a slash. There should be a way of reverting a transaction, a particular transfer transaction. There should be a way of altering code and stuff. But then it's as soon as you can do things as soon as you can alter code in an arbitrary way in order to fix a previous bug, then it's again very difficult to hold that to any particular rule set. It's kind of like you want to be general and flexible in order to fix anything that comes along, but the more general and flexible you are, the harder it is to insist that there are particular rules governing how general and flexible a thing you're allowed to fix. So you kind of, at the end of the day, it might be that in 5 years' time, we actually have probably what a lot of the sort of web, like all the school web people call like the semantic web, where we could actually start to attach fundamental human semantics onto particular transactions or state transitions. And then maybe we can get a step closer towards having comprehensible constitution-like code. But certainly at the moment, I think it's going to be pretty difficult to implement. Yep.
So considering the slashing case you just talked about, where will the money come from? I mean, given back to the 90%?
I think at the moment our slashing goes to the treasury, so it will probably come back from the treasury.
So that means they can just have this, if they want to give back 90% of this money, they can just take it from the treasury and put it back to...
Well, they couldn't do it automatically, but in principle, if they had the backing of the, active voting Polkadot Kusama stakeholding community, then sure. And I think it's not unreasonable to set expectations that, look, the point of slashing is to protect the network. It's not to be, to raise funds or to be just punish, to punish people arbitrarily. And so if a slash happens that, really wasn't maliciously, it was obviously not a maliciously intended, then it's perfectly reasonable, and it's, I think, also expected that the governance should step in and say, look, fair enough. We don't want to... Polkadot or Kusama is not going to be a success if people feel that they're, for not doing anything wrong are going to get punished. Yeah, that's not going to make a great network. So it should be up to the governance, and it should really be up to the community to step forward and say, we want to make... a just network. We want to make an effective. We want slashing to be effective. We want it to be an effective disincentivization for behaving maliciously, but similarly an effective incentivization for behaving honestly. And if you feel that you can behave honestly and still get slashed, then that's problematic. So we need to make sure that that's not the case. Cool, I think I'm at the end now. So my next talk will be on parathreads. I'm not sure when it is, either before or after, 1:45. So in an hour or something, I suppose. Cool, thank you.